Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. I'm sorry it's a few days late, but I was out doing some pretty cool stuff that you'll all see videos on as quickly as I can get them up. But let's jump right in and start answering questions. Firebrand X was talking about using the Eon GC video adapters and the Gameboy Interface software. And he's right, at the moment, if you need the most tweaking out of Gameboy Interface, you can't really get the best quality using the Eon adapter, but you could use older versions, and I think you might be able to tweak the CLI files to launch it in modes that are compatible. But I'm really hoping that in the near future, people will be able to work together a little bit more to get that running, because regardless of any of the stuff going on, the bottom line is that the Eon solution is the only one that you could just click and buy right now. So hopefully that'll get straightened out sooner rather than later, but you still can use the Gameboy Interface software. You just might need to track down either the right version or launch it in a certain mode. Tony Mora asked if I'm getting a preview of the Polymega console. And no, I have no contact with them at all. To be honest, I hadn't even really tried to hunt down a preview. I think that might have been the company that I reached out to last year, and they said, talk to us a few months from now. And then when I contacted them again, they said, wait another few months. And that might not have been them though, but I'm interested to see, but I always have low expectations of stuff like this, only because of the track record of the other companies that have put out or tried to put out other products like this. But I always approach it with an open mind and hope that I'm going to be surprised, but I would just make sure to keep your expectations in check with stuff like this. Lars Conrad was asking about the Aliexpress MVS. He asked if there were any other modifications that you'd have to do to get it up and running without worrying about hurting your equipment. I don't personally have one of these to test, but Dan does, Citrus 3000 PSI. And as far as he knows at this point, the RGB lines are up to spec. It's just the sync line that you need to add a resistor to. I can't remember if he checked audio or not, but maybe hit him up on Twitter to see. I vaguely remember him saying it was safe enough to not blow out anything, so maybe audio was included in that. But with all Neo Geo solutions, there's a range of things that you need to do in order to get it so-called perfect. So Firebrand X above was just talking about his RGB bypass, where in his opinion he got it very close to perfect, which, coming from him, that means a lot. But if you start to scope these things out and look at the way the video signals are made, there's a lot that goes into it. So actually perfect, what displays you're using, capture cards, all this stuff, that's really, there'll be a video out in a couple of months that goes really deep into this stuff. But as far as just buying a cheap thing, plugging it in and using it, I think all you need to do, if you're using RGB, I don't know about the other outputs, I think all you need to do is just add that resistor to sync. And if you're going audio directly into something like a stereo receiver, then I wouldn't worry, because those have a pretty high tolerance for voltage fluctuations, whereas things like small components, SCART switchers, have to fall within spec. So if you're looking to get one of those, you probably will be okay with just the resistor on the sync line, but I'll let everybody know if anything else is heard. Dave Sobel asked if there's a resource to find good 4K TVs, and Artings is one of them. I believe there's another site, but the problem with a lot of those sites are they don't always get every model, and stuff changes. I think a lot of these companies use, at least in the past, they've always done large runs of production, and then when that sells out, they do another large run of production that may or may not be the exact same specs. Maybe a slightly different board change, different panel change. So that, and I've seen Artings do ratings on things that have a 55, a 65, and a 70-inch panel, and they'll test the 55, and the other two have different ratings. The other thing too is they don't always hit all of the settings. So like the TCL TV I tested had about 2.5, 3 frames of lag until you downloaded a Roku app and then went into advanced settings on your phone and then changed one of the settings there, and then it dropped under 1 frame of lag. So by no means am I trying to shit on Artings or ratings, whatever you want to call it, or any of those other sites. There's a lot that goes into it, and the best thing that you could do is just find community-oriented sites where people will post their results with numbers, not I didn't feel any lag, actual real numbers. And hopefully I'll be able to do something on the site as soon as the new version launches and people can contribute. Hopefully there'll be something where we could post screenshots and measurements But at the moment, if you want the best quality TV, and I don't want to start a TV debate, but the LG OLEDs are the best ones I've ever seen. They have under 2 frames of lag. Most models do, I'm pretty sure. And I think they're slowly improving with every model. And the black levels are insane. If you want a much more affordable TV, the TCL TVs in North America I've been very impressed with, because you can get the lag for under 1 frame. And of course, they're very cheap. I think my cousin just picked up a 55-inch for $400, or maybe it was a 50-inch. But I have to go back and measure again because he got the 2018 model. But the 2017 model of that TV definitely had under a frame of lag if you go in and into the app. So it's unfortunately way more complicated than just you know, finding a good list of things, because on those same TVs, I'd be willing to bet if you go through composite video, it's going to process it as 480i, and you'll get tons of lag no matter what mode you're in, because it has to deinterlace as well as scale. So I think that was a really long, rambly answer, but I just wanted to explain myself as to why I wouldn't just take those online websites for face value, and just so people could get a better understanding of how much more goes into it. But you know, running through HDMI at a higher resolution, meaning not 480i, you know, not interlaced, is always a good bet, and try to find TVs that other people have tested themselves. Firebrand X was asking about breadboards. And, you know, a couple of good questions in here. I only know the basics about stuff like this, and when I use breadboards, it's exactly as Firebrand X just did for his audio mod, and that it's essentially only one step over just piling everything together, taping it, and using it for testing. I don't really use breadboards for any permanent designs. Same with Firebrand X. He just kind of used one to slap together a test to make sure it was running. But one of the things that I was always curious about is, as he said, some chips you could just fit right into the boards, and then, you know, bend the legs over, solder them in, and it's pretty cool. It looks like almost like a more professional solution, but some chips don't. So I know you can get TSOP adapters, so you could put the smaller chips onto a board and put those boards onto a breadboard. But that is actually a pretty cool question. So does anybody know of breadboards that you can get that fit different size chips? Or is it all that one standard size that you usually find? So cool question, and I don't have the answer. Sorry. Hopefully somebody could chime in down below. Tofu Man was asking about 960p output of the OSSC. So I'll try to make this one quick, but there's a few different ways to answer this. So first of all, the 960p output is just 480p doubled on the open source scan converter, which is a pretty cool feature that works on some TVs and capture cards, but not others. Also, when it works, sometimes it looks amazing, other times not so much, because maybe your TV doesn't know what 960p is and tries to stretch it the wrong way, or, you know, there's always things that can go wrong in non-standard resolutions like that. But he asked how it would look for things like the GC Video 480p. I've tried it on that, and I've tried it with the Dreamcast, and I think one other 480p source. And once again, depending on the display, sometimes it looked amazing, and sometimes it looked weird because my display didn't really know what to do with it. As far as using something like the RetroTink to go 480p to 960p, once again, it just depends on the source and the display. So any console that was originally 240p, like the NES, let's say, I wouldn't double 480p. I would do pass-through to 240p. Into the OSSC and use its 4 and 5x scaling, especially if you have an S-video source. Like I showed in the review, those seem to do really well when being scaled, whereas composite looks pretty terrible always. But you know, I'm actually kind of curious what it would look like to take maybe a PlayStation 2 480i game, component into the RetroTink, let the RetroTink make that 480p, and then let the OSSC double that to 960p. I don't think it would be something that's easy to do in practice. That's a pretty neat experiment. But basically, it really just, the things like the analog video aliasing and artifacts, you know, if you're using S-video, you're not going to see those nearly as much. Composite's going to look terrible on anything except a direct 480p output. And all of it doesn't really matter if your displays aren't compatible with it. So sorry for the drawn out answer, but what seemed like an easy question actually had a couple of different parts to it. Eat Up 86 asked if the voltage regulation device that we talked about on the Retro Roundtable might work in a scenario to step down a voltage from 120 volts to 110 for Japanese consoles and things like that. And I don't think so. I'm quite obviously not an expert on power, otherwise I wouldn't have bugged Renee and Zach and all those guys with all my incessant questions. But I'm pretty sure that's going to be a completely different thing, especially because now you're also talking about the input and output voltage, where those power regulators are really just making sure that whatever power brick you have is getting a clean power signal. So I wouldn't use it for that. But what I would suggest is, instead of doing step down, looking into using a US power supply that will work with the other devices, because it's just overall cheaper and easier, and step-down converters are just big, heavy devices. And at the end of the day, you might be able to use something like that brand new power adapter that Steve from HD Retrovision found, and a pigtail adapter, and get a perfect, cheap solution for using consoles that weren't meant for your power supplies or power circuit in the wall. But yeah, I definitely wouldn't try to use the power regulator as a step-down converter. But it's a good question. Kester Weeks asked, why won't the SNES get an HDMI mod? And I think the easiest way to describe it is that you just can't tap into the signals on the video chips the same way you could a NES or some of the Atari consoles. And the only way to actually do it efficiently, at least at the moment, would be to essentially put something like the OSSC built right into the SNES. And at that point, it's cheaper and easier to get a Super NT or the OSSC itself. While that might be cool in certain scenarios, overall it's probably not something that most people, including myself, would be interested in, because you could spend the same money to have a better overall solution. Now, of course, who knows what's going to happen in the future? Who knows what crazy inventions people are going to come up with? But at the moment, if you really are looking for HDMI from a SNES, I could honestly say there's no better solution than the Super NT. It just works perfect. And hopefully we'll see that RGB output adapter for it at some point, so that you could use it for a full range of SNES gaming, whether it's flat screen, VGA monitor, RGB. Hopefully they'll release more details on that soon as well. Kyle Gamblin asked about using either HD Retrovision or RGB SCART cables on a modded SNES. And if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's which is the better one to use overall. And if that's the case, the truth is that it's really just whatever your existing setup already is. So, let's say you have a CRT TV with component inputs and you're already using a Wii. Yeah, just get the HD Retrovision cables. It's an easy answer. It's a perfect output. Maybe you have a full component solution going into a scaler already, and this is your only one RGB console. Then, once again, there's zero complaints about the HD Retrovision cables. The only other side of that is, of course, if you're going to go and do an RGB setup, it's definitely better just to get RGB, because you don't have to mess with the different formats. The only time where I think there's going to be any kind of difference or quality difference is very extreme scenarios. So let's say you're writing a SNES game or building an add-on device or something, and you want to do screen caps and zoom in 100 times. Maybe your capture card does better with RGB, maybe it does better with component. Maybe there's something in the signal that when you zoom in 1,000 times to check for artifacts, it's going to be different through the Retrovision cables based on the RGB mod you have. It's really for actual use in gaming. My opinion is just use whatever's easier for your overall setup. And if you're building a new setup, I would definitely suggest going RGB. No offense to my friends at HD Retrovision, but there's RGB cables for every console that supports it. And while they're trying really hard to get their adapters out there, there aren't HD Retrovision cables for every console. So if you have, 6 or 7 consoles that you really love that you want to get a good RGB setup on, get the G-SCART switch, get some Pack-a-Punch cables, mod the consoles that are necessary, and there you go. There's the whole solution. So the only other thing, it could have been interpreted, your question, as instead of doing an RGB bypass on a SNES using HD Retrovisions, maybe on an older SNES or something like that. And the answer to that is it doesn't matter what cable you're using. Going 2-chip versus 1-chip or mini, that's always going to be sharper on the newer ones. Or if your question is, an RGB bypassed 1-chip with the RGB cable versus just stock one chip with the HD Retrovisions, once again, you're always going to get better quality when the source device is at its best. So, you know, I hope that put everything into perspective correctly, and I hope I understood your question right. Jason Jackson saw the RetroTink 2X video and was wondering why wasn't something like this used or considered for HD Retrovision cables, because if you can get a really great line double, then that would be compatible with everything a lot better. And I think the answer is HD Retrovision teased their HDMizer like 4 or 5 years ago, but you know, they couldn't get it out because they have lives, real full-time jobs. They're working on the development and sales and support of their current cables. Just kind of life got in the way. So I think, you know, I hate to answer for those guys, but I'm pretty sure the answer is because they thought the right solution was to put in an insane amount of research and development in getting the best RGB to component for each console. And then once you're at component, then deal with the scaling later. And I think they thought that their HDMizer would have been out a couple of years ago, and so did I, for that matter. But yeah, I think that's really just it, because once you have a really great source, then you could do much more things with it without worrying about side effects. But at least at the moment, there is a solution now with the RetroTink 2X, and I mean, I really do like that product. I thought it was the perfect middle ground solution for very many people. Daniel Yoshana, I hope I got that name right, had a couple of good questions. First, he said he bought a cheap random SCART switch from eBay, and he sees strange artifacts when it's connected. Same thing happened with me. I got a lot of those Lindy switches, and there's a couple of other ones that were garbage. One put like a purple tint over everything. It was weird. So my answer to that question is, you know, you mentioned that the G-SCART was out of your price range. I would say buy the best cheap switch that's out there, and then see if it works for your needs, but always keep in the back of your mind maybe saving up for a G-SCART. But at the moment, the Otaku switch is one that I've tested a little bit. I don't have, you know, I didn't do my usual insane testing that I do for all the other crap that I have, but I can say that I plugged in a bunch of C-Sync, composite sync cables into it, turned all the consoles on at the same time, and didn't see any visual artifacts. So I did use a capture card. I didn't just look at a screen and guess, and I did zoom in, and I couldn't tell, I couldn't see any difference when multiple consoles were on, even when switching between the inputs and stuff like that. I couldn't see a massive difference between plugged directly in. I can't remember how much of a difference, but it wasn't enough, in my opinion, it wasn't enough to see while you're gaming. That being said, I don't know what happens if you put in, you know, a SCART cable with using composite video as sync and an unshielded cable. Is that going to leak over into the other outputs? You know, there's a lot of other stuff that goes into it. But those switches you can get between $40 and $65. I think if you already have a SCART to BNC or SCART to scalar solution, I would get the second one up. It's the $40 one with a case. So I think it ends up being $52 or something. And then, you know, if you don't have a SCART to BNC output, depending on the price, you might save money buying the $65 one, which has RCA outs, and that way you can use RCA to BNC converters and get a really cheap solution going in. I believe you're using a SCART TV though, so just the cheaper one with a case is probably the best for you. The second question was that he has a PAL-only CRT, and he needs to get PAL or NTSC to PAL composite video converters. So that's something that I'm running into now as well, because I have a very awesome little PAL TV that I found locally that takes NTSC and PAL over RGB, because it does have a SCART input. 60 Hertz and 50 Hertz works perfect, but only accepts PAL signals on RF, composite, and S-video. And I was really curious about that as well, because I thought this was going to be the perfect little test TV, so I could maybe test RF for, you know, just before I do a mod on an RF console, and as well as composite and S. So I would also like to know the answer to that. If anybody knows of a good, inexpensive region converter, I would love to have one just to be able to use both to use this TV for NTSC signals and just to get PAL consoles into other devices. I say inexpensive or affordable, or reasonable at least, because I've seen a bunch of really expensive ones that were meant for high-end equipment back when this stuff mattered. So hopefully somebody has a good, cheap solution for it. But those are good questions. Santiago Sanchez asked, what are the best MVS consolizations? And I honestly don't know of a good consistent place to get one, but I really hope that they're out there because, first of all, MVS games are infinitely cheaper than AES games. But maybe you already have a large MVS collection, maybe you need a device that you sometimes use in an arcade and sometimes use on a monitor. There's lots of reasons to want an MVS, and I really hope to find a good known place to get them consoleized. But other than certain modders that do it when they have spare time, I'm not really sure of a place, and I do know that there were some places charging a lot of money for pre-modded consoleized MVSs that were kind of terrible. One of my friends got one years ago that it looked really nice, but when we finally started to look into it, do screen captures, compare it to other solutions, it outputted pretty terrible quality. Certainly not what you would expect for the money. And I don't, that was years ago, so I'm sure there's better solutions, and maybe even that same company did a better job now. But one thing one suggestion I might offer up, if you don't already have a large MVS collection, or if you're just getting into Neo Geo now, maybe consider getting an AES in one of the new ROM carts. And that way you could really just save your collection on the wall on a shelf and not have to worry about using the old expensive games. But also because the AES just will work fine on anything that you plug it into. There's of course the easier, cheaper mods you can do to get better video output. There's a couple of upcoming ones that you can get great output. So it's just, if you're really only going to be playing on an RGB monitor or scaler and you don't already have a lot invested, or if you don't mind not playing the originals, I would look at it that way. And I would almost never recommend just getting a console and a ROM cart and forgetting about the originals. I just have such a, all of those, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 Neo Geo games on eBay really always annoy me. So, it's at the point where it's like, I can't understand, unless you're a collector and you love it for the collection point of view, I would never want to play a $3,000 cartridge. If it was my favorite game in the world and I wanted to own it with all original artwork, of course I would. I'd love to have that on the shelf and know that's something I collected. I would never want to play it though. I'd want to play the game on a ROM cart, so I wouldn't ever risk messing with the original. So just my thoughts and opinion, something to consider is maybe just get the AES in one of the ROM carts. Armed and Overclocked said that he's going to be using an Extron Crosspoint switch for his setup, and wants to know if there's any kind of sync issues when using component, because when you use RGB, you have to have pure C-Sync running through, not composite video or Luma. And note, component works absolutely perfect. And in fact, of course, you don't even plug into the sync line because it's just the 3 cables for component. I know lots of people that even mix, so they have RGB and component in the same setup, and they never have issues on the output side. So great question, but no, you'll definitely be safe. Jason Day asked, what are all the AES mods I keep hinting about? And I'm sorry, but I've sworn to secrecy on that one. Even if the people involved in this don't care if it's public, I always keep my mouth shut until the developers themselves make it public knowledge. It's just a weird pet peeve I have that I just don't spill the beans for anybody. But what I will say is that if you're looking to upgrade audio and video quality on your AES right now, check out Firebrand X's page on what he did to his, because the components are super cheap, and if you want to upgrade in the future, it's not like you'd have to waste a full weekend's worth of work and a couple of $100. It's a few hours worth of work and less than $10 for the parts. So if you're looking to do stuff right away, maybe just take a look at those guides and see if they're good enough for you. But if not, or if you're an insane, crazy, unreasonable perfectionist like me, just wait until all of the mods are released and make your decision then if it's worth it to go through the insanity to get perfection or to just get very close to perfection using the basic mods. Dave Kirscher, the infamous Thumbbob creator, caught me out. He said, I noticed in Weekly Roundup number 103, the last one that just came out, that you're showing posts made by yourself in a new style format. Is this just pre-filling Retro RGB 2.0 with new content? That is exactly what this is. Every single thing I talk about in the Roundup will be a news post. I'm not sure if eventually there'll be too many posts to talk about in the Roundup or something I want to talk about that isn't a news post, but for the past month, every single thing has been a news post, and it will be for at least the foreseeable future. And pre-filling is exactly right. I didn't want to launch this new site with a page that says news coming soon. That felt dumb. So it felt like it was a good idea for me to practice, get the news pages up there, and have already a good amount of content when the site launches. And I mean, the site was supposed to launch, first it was supposed to launch April 1st, then it was like maybe mid-June, then it was July 1st, and the very last thing that I'm working on, so right now, July 1st at 1 in the afternoon, the last piece of the puzzle is going through every single page, adding it to the sidebar so that the navigation's the same, and checking to make sure that there aren't any huge mistakes. It's very hard for me and my OCD to skim through these pages and not want to rewrite everything, take new pictures for everything. So essentially the new site is going to be an exact one-for-one copy of the original. I'm just trying to catch any import mistakes. Sometimes pictures are sized wrong, grids don't line up. And anything that's a huge change, like the Gameboy Interface software, that page is completely outdated now, which sucks because that was like a weekend worth of work to do that review. But stuff like that, I'll be adding notes like, hey, this is all outdated. Here's a link to a new place you can get it, and I'll get this site soon. But once I get all that finished, that's the last piece of the puzzle. Then I'm just going to launch it, and that'll be what it is from now on. I have a few friends who I trust very much who are willing to post some of their news on the news page as well, which is a big help for me because very often I'll see some of my friends post things like arcade stuff that I can grasp the concept, but I'm not deeply ingrained in the arcade world. So to have them just post in their own words would make it easier because sometimes I get it wrong or I get it close enough, but it's not great. So on launch day, I should have at least one, possibly two contributors so we can get better content up there. And then I'll just see what happens. If no one cares and nobody goes to it, whatever. I'll just hit delete and it was good practice, I guess. But I'm thinking that it's a site that at least a small group of people would appreciate, and especially links from the roundup, because now you can go back and see the original news post I wrote, any of the links I included, because in the YouTube description, there's a lot of times I'll have like 6 links under a subject with not much context because it's it's just a YouTube description. So now I could have everything go back to the news pages when it launches. And kind of just that way people could have more description of what it is that they need to click on and why. Wow, I just rambled a lot about that. Sorry. Obviously, as you could tell, I'm very excited about launching the new site. I want to get this stuff in. I want to have some people contribute. And I want to get all of the outdated pages either deleted, cleaned up, re-reviewed, or just kind of make it do what I should have done a year ago. And then after that, after everything's up and running, then I'll worry about the wiki. I took on too many projects at once, and for a while there I was drowning. So now my head's above water, but I gotta just keep pushing forward and getting this stuff out. But it was very cool that you picked up on that because only one other person did. So yeah, that's the entire story behind the news page, and it should at this point launch. I mean, I got a lot of traveling to do in the next 2 weeks, so it should launch by the end of July, barring any craziness. But yeah, good catch, man. Adam Brody had 2 questions. First, he talked more about otakustore.net, and Kevin Blaze, once again, sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, chimed in and said in his experience, Otaku Store is a good store and you could rely on their mods. I only had one experience with them and I had no issues, but I only bought a kit, so I don't really know anything else. And the other question about Adam Brady had, are those NES front-loading RGB? Erik Hurley had a couple of good questions. He said, with FBX's recent audio fix for the Terra Onion SSDS3, and with their V2 revision supposedly fixing the RGB output, it didn't, but Voltar's board does, so for the most part. Do you think it's now worth picking one up? So my answer to that is just simply, if you're okay with that kind of money and work, then yeah, it seems like a great product. I believe, Erik, you do mod your own consoles, so as long as you don't mind spending the money, and then to be honest, I would actually also get, if Firebrand X comes out with an audio board for it, I would get that as well. So if you're okay with spending all the money to get the op-amp replacement, to get Voltar's RGB board, remove the components from the SSDS3, put these in its place, it seems to be a great solution. I mean, the optical drive emulator keeps improving with every firmware update. I think the regular HuCard ROMs work fine. The new feature of dumping HuCards is pretty cool too. So as long as you're okay with the money, and as long as you're okay with the whole principle of buying a product that the developers know is flawed and refuse to fix, then sure. To be honest, if the TurboGrafx was my favorite console, that's exactly what I would do. I'd be annoyed that I have to fix a brand new product, but I'd still do it because if it was my favorite, I would just want something like this to experience it. What console would I use is a good question too. I think I would use the smaller core graphics PC engines, the ones that are like a square, just because it'd be really neat to have a little setup where you just plug it all in and it's a small little thing that has everything you could imagine. If I were going all the way and just wanted everything imaginable, I would get the super graphics. But I mean, you can get a full, I think it's the core graphics setup for, console, all the cables, controllers shipped for around $100 these days, which who knows, by the time this airs, maybe it'll be twice that. But you're looking at, after shipping, almost $500 for the super graphics. And I think there's only like 8 games that are only super graphics compatible. So once again, money versus how much you like it. If you want to get the best of the best out there, you want access to everything, get the super graphics, get the SSD S3, and mod the audio and video on it, and you'll have everything you could imagine. If you don't need those extra games, or if you just want to, you're happy with the regular library of the TurboGrafx, then I would get the small little core graphics just because they're inexpensive, and now it's a small, cool little solution. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks so much to all my amazing Patreons. I can't tell you how much I appreciate all your support, and you're probably all sick of hearing it, but I'm never going to stop saying it because I really mean it. Also, I've remembered to post all of the links to some of the stuff I talked about in the Patreon description. I should have been doing that this whole time. Sorry. And as always, any questions for next week, post down below on the Patreon page, and I'll see if I can get to all of them. But that's it for today. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next time.